Well, it's good to see Jen Senko. It's been about 5 years since you were last on the show. I think we did it in person, if memory serves. But you put out a book. Well, you've just put out a book based sort of on the documentary you made called Brainwashing My Dad. Jen Senko is a filmmaker, author, media activist, and she is known for her award-winning documentaries, including Roadmap Warrior Women, The Vanishing City, and of course, The Brainwashing of My Dad, narrated by actor and activist Matthew Modine, as well as Jen Senko. And it's a fantastic documentary. Let's talk about.
Is it a how-to thing? Will it teach me how to brainwash this guy?
No, but you could learn how to do it in the process of watching it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There's good tips in there.
Okay.
So I asked Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld to stick around because he's a Freudian psychoanalyst, and your story is very interesting. Your father, I believe, was born 100 years ago.
1922. Oh my God, yes.
Right.
I'm not very quick at math.
Right.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
He voted for Jack Kennedy. He followed Dr. King. He loved animals.
Yes.
And then one day he hated PETA. And when?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Animal testing.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. And was suddenly for animal testing.
Right. Do you mind leaning a little forward just so we can? Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect. Tell me how he raised you, like what his politics were when you were growing up.
My dad was really, really open-minded. Like when hippies came in, I remember thinking, oh my God, that's my dad. Just do whatever you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. And he
served in World War II?
He served in World War II.
Enlisted.
Yeah, he did. He didn't have to, but everybody wanted to, kick the Germans' ass back then.
Right.
And he was a medic. So he didn't really use a gun, which is odd because, how many years later he was a member of the NRA.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, he was a member of everything. But
how did he feel about the Vietnam War?
They never really, I think they were against it, but I think they were confused about it, both my parents. They didn't really talk about it that much. They were really excited by Kennedy and everything Kennedy represented, like science is here, we're going to discover all kinds of new things. And then we're going to help poor people. We're going to, it was just like such a hopeful time. I remember that actually as a little kid. I remember that like hope, like, oh my God, everything's going to be okay now. And
then when did he become the polar opposite?
Well, what happened is he retired from the government because he used to work. He was an engineer, electronics engineer. He retired, and then they moved back to New Jersey from Maryland, and he got a part-time job, but where he had a long commute. Whereas previously he had a commute with a carpool, a bunch of guys. So he wanting to educate himself, he wasn't going to listen to music. He found talk radio, thinking that would be educational, but it was Bob Grant at the time, who was called the father of conservative radio. And that's when he slowly started to change. And then a couple years later, when he fully retired, he graduated to Rush Limbaugh and he had like this bromance with Rush Limbaugh. And Oh my God. That's when he really, really started drastically changing.
Bob Grant. I used to call Bob Grant.
What?
When I was a kid, I used to call Bob Grant and pretend I was a cab driver. I would lower my voice. I have tapes of me. I would sucker him in. I'd say, my son came home. They're reading Plato's Symposium. Do you know what they're teaching in Plato? That the highest form of love is between two men. We got to get this. And you go, I know. I need to go off about the homosexuals. And then I'd say, hey, Bob, there's a picture of Moshe Dayan here in the New York Post, and the eye patch is covering his right eye. But in the New York Times, it's covering his left eye. Can you explain this to me? And he goes, I have the clip. I'm going to play it on the show. I would set him up, and then I would just go. I did it like 3 or 4 times. My mother loved it. She was in a bad mood. She could call Bob Grant.
My mother would have loved that too.
Call Bob. So then Bob Grant spawned Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
So this is like 88, 90, right?
Yeah. I mean, 87 is when the Fairness Doctrine was vetoed, and then it was 88, Rush Limbaugh went national.
Right.
I guess around 88, 89, that's when he retired fully, and then really was like glued to the kitchen, like 3 hours a day. And my mother couldn't stand the sound of Rush Limbaugh. So he built very heavy doors on the kitchen, and she would eat in the living room, and he would eat in the kitchen. God forbid you walk through there while Rush Limbaugh is saying something.
Yeah, I know people who really connected with Rush Limbaugh.
Mm-hmm.
What did Rush Limbaugh do for your father?
Well, a lot of it was timing, but also Rush Limbaugh had this great talent. I mean, he was perfect for the aging white guy at that time because, as we know, there was all of this, so all these social movements going on, women's liberation, civil rights, anti-war, all of the mores were being overturned. And I think a lot of older white men were like, they had this like injured pride, and also just think like, well, then they'd have to reinvent themselves. That's really uncomfortable. And some of the things that they just assumed about life, now they're being told, was wrong. So here comes Rush Limbaugh and Bob Grant saying, oh, the heck with those people telling you that they're wrong. You're not wrong.
Right. So Rush Limbaugh married 3 times, opiate addiction, and speaks of family values, but never had any children. He is a misogynist.
Yes.
Who didn't understand, hated women. Did your father, if you don't mind my asking, his daughter, how did it affect how did his listening to Rush Limbaugh affect your relationship?
It's really a very interesting question. My dad, I was the first one to go to college. My dad was really proud of me. And I was doing these paintings and selling them, and he was really proud of me. And then after Rush Limbaugh, his attitude towards women in general started changing. Like, he would make sure that when company came over, he would call, well, let the girls go sit in the kitchen. I'd say, Dad, they're women in their 50s and stuff. And his attitude towards me changed, but I wasn't sure if it was because I didn't like what I was learning about Republicans at that time, or because I was a woman. But one thing I did notice, even as time went on, he started expecting my mother to wait on him. And he never had done that before.
Really?
Yes. There's a picture in the movie of him sitting there with a knife and fork. I did not pose him that way. And he'd yell, "Babe, get me a beer." He never used to do that before.
We're talking with Jen Senko, filmmaker, author of Brainwashing My Dad.
The
Brainwashing My Dad. And you can buy the book through Source Books. It came out a couple months ago, and I'm reading it, and it's an amazing read. I want to ask Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld or Ethan if they have any questions. Feel free to jump in here.
I have a basic one, which is where were you? Because I spent the summer of 2000 in Charlottesville, Virginia, at a theater, and I couldn't get anything on the radio except for Rush Limbaugh. It was so disturbing. There was this saturation. So I'm wondering, did you live in a place where anything else was available?
No. And it's funny you should ask that, because I just had a conversation with somebody who was saying, because I'm stuck in New Jersey right now because I'm taking care of my mother who's 102, and I can't get NPR. And what you can get, though, you can get right wing up the wazoo.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, for one thing, AM radio has a bigger reach. But he was in New Jersey at the time.
Yeah, because there it was either explicitly evangelical Bible-related radio or Rush Limbaugh. That was it. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Let me ask Jen a question about the economics of right-wing talk radio. Bruce Mom is in our chat room here in our virtual studio audience, and he just wrote something that he says the genius of Rush is that he gave his show for free to small market stations all over the country in exchange for a percentage of the ad revenue that gave these rural stations content they didn't have to produce. In other words, it wasn't necessarily profitable. Rush Limbaugh. He was popular, but by the time he died, he wasn't really as big as he wanted us to believe. And wasn't the marketplace, at least on radio, controlled by a handful of radio chains that would not allow leftist talk show hosts to do what he did, to give the show away for free in exchange for ad revenue?
Well, yes, to that last question and to your previous comment, he didn't even need the ads from the radio. I mean, the Heritage Foundation was giving him millions. So he was never want for money. I don't know if you ever saw a picture of his compound in Florida, But I mean, I don't know if you pity the way he died, that, he was still like a multi-millionaire.
But people don't understand this because it's kind of payola. The Heritage Foundation gave him money to spew their talking points without the audience knowing that he was getting money from the Heritage Foundation. This is against the law, isn't it? You can't take money to say something, to endorse an idea or a product without telling your audience that you're getting money to say these things.
I don't think it is against the law, because he would say he was entertainment. And then he would say, he talked about his formula, getting people angry. And people always ask me, do you believe what you say? Well, that's, for me to know and you to find out. So I don't, what is illegal, like with the FCC?
Well, let's go back to the Heritage Foundation. Tell me about the funding, because that to me is so important. Who was funding him?
Well, you have to go back to, you could go as far back as the Lewis Powell memo when that came out. And, the Heritage Foundation was the first think tank to come out of the Lewis Powell memo. And it sat by the right hand of Reagan, when Reagan was in office, whispering in his ear, water down the FCC, make Rupert Murdoch, a citizen, all of this stuff. So if there wasn't, by the time like the 90s rolled around, there was tons of these think tanks that were working toward getting, free market value into the mainstream and to get a lot of their ideas into the mainstream. And to, like Rush Limbaugh was for the overdog. He was always defending, big tobacco or big corporations. And so these guys were all like either, mega corporations or think tanks that represented them. And so it was easy just to Rush Limbaugh the money, and he was very talented.
And how do they get the money? Oh, go ahead, Dr. Herschel.
Because I got to go, but I want to do what I don't like doing at all, which is to give an armchair psychoanalysis without seeing the person. But here's what I hear in this very familiar story. A guy works, he's got a social connection at work, he's got a bunch of guys he drives to work with every day, and then he retires and he's lonely. And he's looking for a new community. And this community pops up on the radio, and it welcomes him and it makes him feel good. And it's a very slippery slope.
Yes.
After that, till you buy the whole kit and caboodle.
Right. That's really part of it.
Yeah.
And I liked what you said earlier too before I joined about how many of us are vulnerable to brainwashing. It's true.
Except for Ethan, but everybody else.
Yeah.
I got to run.
Thank you, Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld.
Good meeting you, Jen.
Thank you. Ethan, you can, if you want to stick around. And
okay, I'll stick for a moment. I got to run pretty soon.
So he's getting funded. So Rush Limbaugh is getting funded by these conservative think tanks to spew their talking points, almost reading them verbatim.
I think, I'm not sure about that, but he was very creative. He developed his own style. He could be sarcastic, and I'm sure that he would take what they were feeding him and just create his own shtick out of it.
Right. I remember my father listened to him and was amused. He would commute to work, listen to Rush Limbaugh, and call him a carnival barker, and just thought this guy doesn't believe the thing he's saying, and it's kind of interesting. I've never heard anything about this. I said, well, why do you listen to it? He says, I can't believe he's able to go this long, talking nonstop. And then we figured out that somebody was whispering into his ear, telling him, this is what you're going to say tomorrow. This is what, and after a while, he knew what to say, but he was getting coached by, like you said, the Heritage Foundation.
And also he was on stimulants.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, Ethan. That's right.
Yeah.
So much so that he lost his hearing.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. We're talking with Jen Senko, and she's
I'm afraid I have to run also, but thank you so much. And it's great to meet you, Jen. I look forward to reading your book.
Oh, great to meet you too, Ethan.
Thanks.
I can't wait to watch Angeline.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Jen is a documentarian, and her new book is The Brainwashing of My Dad, also the name of her documentary. I remember the end of the documentary. I don't want to give it away.
You can. You know why you can? I never used to, but I feel it's so important. People will still want to see it and read about it because of the detail. Go ahead.
You tell us how things were resolved with your dad.
Okay. Well, I'll give the brief version.
Right.
So, what happened in 2010? My parents moved to a senior community, and somehow during the move, his radio broke. But by this time, he wasn't fixing things so much anymore. So he put it in the garage and it stayed there. And it broke that habit of listening to Rush Limbaugh. And my mother started eating lunch with him again. And then after a while, they needed a new TV in the kitchen. My mom got it and loves programming remotes. So she programmed the remotes, had stickies all over them. He couldn't figure out.
Like me.
Right. So she had her own method. So he stopped watching Fox. And so, he started mellowing out right away. He became like a sweeter, he was funny, always had been funny. He was beginning to be funny again. And then the most amazing thing happened when he had to go in the hospital for a kidney stone. My mother said, Jennifer, can you kill some of Daddy's emails? Because they had these old computers then. They're going to clog up his computer and take up space. And I told her, Mom, they just keep coming. There were all these right-wing, Issue Watch, the NRA, anti-illegal, all of them. You'd get tons of them, and he forwarded them to us all the time. So I said, Mom, I can't just delete them. They keep coming. So she got the idea of unsubscribing him from many of them and subscribing him to some of what she read, which was like Truth Out, Alternate, Reader-Supported News. So he had more of a mix. And I'd bet that most of the right-wing subscriptions were gone. So he started to change back. And one day he said to her, I like that guy Obama. I like him.
Just got the chills. I knew it just, I just got the chills.
Can you imagine me when my mom called me and said that? I nearly dropped to the floor.
Right.
So the reason why I don't mind blowing the lid off the end, you can still read it and get the juicy details.
Right.
Is because it's such an important message. You take away this media, you take away the drumbeat and the not intoxication or interrogation. What's the word? Indoctrination, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the person can change back. So
Right.
you remove them from that source, and he changed back to his old self.
Right.
It was a miracle because by then it was near the end of his life.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
got to see my movie before he died.
No complaints.
Yep.
No complaints. You have nothing to complain about. It is, unless you're hurting people, it's a journey. The Reverend Barry W. Lynn, maybe I'll bring him in because he has an interesting story with his guest from last week, Reverend Schenck, who told a similar story. The Reverend Barry W. Lynn is a minister in the United Church of Christ. He's also a lawyer, and he ran Americans for Separation of Church and State.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time in his life when he was going on Fox and Crossfire and arguing the social issues of the day,
Mm-hmm.
gay marriage and abortion, and his nemesis was Reverend Schenck. And Reverend Barry W. Lynn joins us a little earlier. Do you mind telling Jen Senko what happened, especially and on our show last week? It was really a beautiful thing to see.
Absolutely. Is my microphone working? Because I've got some signal here that suggests it's not. Can you hear me?
You're coming in loud and clear. Maybe
Okay,
the microphone.
terrific.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, Rob Schenck used to be a tremendously skilled advocate at getting time on the news. So if I was at the Supreme Court to do something about gay marriage or reproductive justice, he'd be there too. And he would always he'd be wearing a collar. He represented a group called the National Clergy Council. I never knew exactly who they were. But he would have props. He and his brother once brought what was alleged to be a fetus in a jar of formaldehyde. And then at the Supreme Court, he would put up what looked like a pulpit. He might bring a cross, and he is all visual. And so the local news loved that. They didn't care who he represented. They said, here's a minister who's anti-gay marriage, who's anti-choice, who's anti-separation of church and state. He's wearing a collar. Let's film him. Let's get a couple of words from him too. And he was a very articulate and remains a very articulate person. Some years ago, I started to hear that he was changing his mind on some issues like guns. And there was a documentary made about his change of heart over guns. And at that time, his argument was, I'm supposed to be pro-life, but guns just kill people. That's not consistent. So the director of this film is also a philanthropist, I believe in the Disney family, actually. And she made this film.
Abigail Disney.
Abigail Disney.
I saw the film.
Yeah, and he's in it a lot. He clearly had a change of heart. But then I started to hear that he was changing his views on other matters. And what he did last week, he explained exactly why he had changed his mind on abortion, that he said he was living in a fantasy world where people around him made him believe things that he couldn't possibly, that weren't real in the real world. And then toward the end of the show, this actually surprised me. He said, I need to apologize to you. I should have listened to you 30 years ago, and I didn't. But when you would speak, he'd say, I just had this sense that maybe Barry's right after all. And now he said, but you were right. And he sent me a note afterwards, and he said, I just should have listened to you 30 years ago. So it's one
of the most beautiful moments we've had on this show. I sat back and watched it. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was, I think people cause a lot of damage with their words. I think Rush Limbaugh has blood on his hands. Transgender people who get beaten up, it's because of Rush Limbaugh. Gay people who can't find housing, the dead in Iraq, it's all on Rush Limbaugh's hands. But I do believe in redemption. I want to play this clip to get this new hour going. This is George W. Bush speaking at his library, trying to push the war in Ukraine. Jen, I know you've seen this, but
I'll watch it.
Yeah, this is a watershed moment, I believe, for historians.
The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway. 75.
When I watched that, he's a war criminal. We know that goes without saying. We talked to Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld about this clip, he's a Freudian psychoanalyst, and we talked about how he obviously the subconscious is working, but there's also the subconscious punishing him and asking for forgiveness. That is the best George W. Bush can do, to ask for forgiveness. And the more I look at that, and I want to get both of your reaction to this. Here's a serial killer, a mass murderer. Watching that, let me ask Jen Sanko, do you have a little more sympathy for George W. Bush?
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of humble in that moment. And he muttered after he made the mistake, and Iraq too, right? That's what he said, I think, right? And so that sounds like an admittance to me, you know.
Yeah.
So I do like to believe that people can change. Yeah, I think I do.
Yeah. Would you come back?
I sure will.
Yeah.
I love talking to you.
Yeah, it's been too long. Jen Senko is a filmmaker and media activist. You live here in New York City, and you've done other documentaries, Roadmap Warrior Women, The Vanishing City, and The Brainwashing of My Dad. That came out a couple of years ago. Go stream, rent, buy The Brainwashing of My Dad, and then buy 10 copies, give it to libraries and friends, give it to that proverbial crazy uncle. Everybody should see this movie and read her book. It's an adaptation of her documentary, came out about 3 or 4 months ago. It's published by Source Books. It's called the Brainwashing of My Dad. Before you go, and follow her on Twitter at BrainwashingDad. Fox News. That's the true genius of the brainwashing, isn't it? What before you go, and I think the Reverend Barry W. Lynn will join in on this. They program that to brainwash people, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, basically, you know, if you read Gabriel Sherman's book, The Loudest Voice in the Room, about Roger Ailes, I mean, first of all, he had a memo detailing how to create more GOP voters by having GOP favorable news. But then he studied like Leni Riefenstahl, you know, he studied ways on how to brainwash people. And they wanted to create GOP voters. So it was designed that way, you know, and it was like the perfect evil pair, he and Rupert Murdoch, because Rupert Murdoch wanted the same things that he did.
Do we need to do what Fox News is doing? It feels like MSNBC is kind of doing that, but they're neoliberal hacks who are pretty much on the same side as Fox News. I mean, there's very little difference between Rachel Maddow, I mean, you know, abortion, gay marriage, on the social issues. There's a difference between Rachel Maddow and Sean Hannity, but on the big issues like war, income inequality, she pays lip service to maybe opposing Sean Hannity, but never really any. We don't hear. I don't think we hear MSNBC championing Medicare for all or closing down ICE. I mean, they're not willing to change anything in this country.
Well, see, that's why I argue with right wingers that say, well, MSNBC is the, you know, the bookend of Fox, not news. I don't call it Fox without calling it not news first. Mm-hmm. First of all, it's under that a corporate umbrella. So it has corporate masters. And the corporate masters are invested in war. They're invested in pharmaceuticals. So they're not going to do anything that's going to damage a relationship with that or damage their economy. And they don't want tax raises either. Okay. So they're under that corporate umbrella. What Noam Chomsky taught me was that they're going to do about this much, but they're going to leave out, you know, they're going to leave out a lot. Mm-hmm. But I do admit to watching MSNBC at times because, well, my mother needs to watch TV and I don't want her to watch CNN or Fox, so we watch MSNBC.
Right.
It's different also in that it's not purposely manipulative. It's not trying to sell an ideology. I feel it's mostly responding, finally, to right-wing media. and what it has done to this country, which is outrageous and dangerous. So I feel that they're kind of the answer to that, but limited. But again, they don't use the same tactics. They don't feign anger. They don't act like they're your buddy. They're more. They have more integrity, and they'll correct themselves if they're wrong.
That's true. That's true.
Um,
Go ahead.
I think I've told a story on the show before, but when Ollie North was around and a celebrity, he was on the radio. I used to do Friday afternoons with him. And then he got a television show on MSNBC. And they decided that they were going to have, do it like a Crossfire-like thing, so have some progressive. And it came down to Paul Begala, who is really the corporate Democrat, and myself. And a lot of the people on the staff would say, Barry, you were an activist. You are still an activist. We should hire you. I got a call from a vice president at MSNBC who said, Barry, I got one question for you. If we give you this job, will you defend the Clinton administration every night, no matter what they do? And of course, he was going to war at the time. And my friend Alan Combs, who was on Fox opposite Sean Hannity, and Alan would just say, this war is BS. We should not be participating. And they were both of them saying the same thing. And I said to this guy, no, I cannot do that. I cannot make such a promise. And he said, well, I think this will be the last conversation we ever had, but I did think that would be your answer. In other words, what they want in that instance was corporate. And I was a good friend of Ed Schultz. And Ed Schultz was either fired, depending on who you listen to or what he says to you at the moment. Of course, Ed's dead. But it was either over the pipeline issue or because he wanted to cover Bernie Sanders. And because he was against the pipeline, he was for Bernie Sanders, he literally was fired from MSNBC and ended up on what was then called Russia Today. Right. And became known as RT. But
I loved Ed Schultz, watching Ed Schultz.
Right.
He had been a Republican. Mm-hmm. He came from North Dakota, but he started to change his mind, as people want to do. And I thought he was literally the best host on MSNBC. And when he was fired, there was nobody like him to replace him. And now it's very difficult with a straight face for me to watch it, starting with Joe Scarborough. When Joe Scarborough was first hired, he was on at night. And this is what he did. He'd have one person, one progressive like me, and he'd have these cubes, and he'd be against me, and then he'd have three other people against me. Right. And that was the pattern. You had a progressive, and usually the progressive spent the first 30 seconds going, I think this is somewhat unfair because, there's three of you, and you don't get anywhere doing that. If you don't want to do it, you never come back, but you don't complain about it when you're there. But Scarborough, to me, he loved Trump. He and his wife were going to Mar-a-Lago, and then they had a falling out, and then all of a sudden he becomes the anti-Trump voice, another anti-Trump voice on MSNBC. To which I say, I guess he saw where the money was going, where it was coming. And that's the only reason he's against Trump. But his core principles are just as conservative as any of the voices on Fox News. And then, and it bleeds out. They have this character on Meet the Press now who, barely asks a difficult question. And I do understand, as a person who did a lot of talk radio and was a host of a lot of talk radio shows, you don't want to go full bore into somebody that you, in fact, want to have back again. I did a show, a Crossfire-like show on radio in Washington, and we'd have a senator on almost every day. So you have to be a little delicate if it's going to be some right-wing senator. but you don't have to fall on your face in awe of what they say. And I frequently think that's what's happening on Meet the Press. So MSNBC is not, I can't watch it. I watch CNN if I want something remotely normal. But honestly, the time that is wasted in the news talking about, with the same clips, endlessly repeated on every show on CNN from morning until I go to bed at night and flip it on, and there's the same stuff going on, the same clips.
I want to take a break. I before we say goodbye to Jen, I want to play you Dennis Prager, who I think is equally dangerous as Rush Limbaugh. And now I can't find it. Anyway, all right. Not going to happen. Hang on. All right, didn't happen. My rule of thumb is if it's not written down, it's not information. Now, I know we have a lot of listeners who are blind. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
I know we have a lot of listeners. I'm having problems here. Hang on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could hear you before.
Hear you.
I know we have blind listeners. I know we have dyslexic listeners. And I know there are people who adults who haven't learned how to read yet. And they listen to books on tape and they watch documentaries like The Brainwashing of My Dad. And I don't mean to offend them. I don't mean to offend the people who have trouble reading. My rule of thumb is I want to see it in writing. It's not a fact until I can hold it in my hand and read it. That's why Twitter's so dangerous. Twitter destroys careers because you put it in writing, you tweet it, you can't edit it, and unless you take it down immediately, it's there for everybody to do a screen capture and you're exposed. You can say things on radio, you can say things on television and podcasts, and you can play the same thing over and over again. And it doesn't carry the weight as something that's been written down. I don't watch TV news because it's not written down.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not written down, it ain't a fact and you can't hold somebody accountable. And I'll tell you one other thing that's really telling about the United States government. When there's a hearing on Capitol Hill, you cannot get a transcript of it. When you read about a hearing on Capitol Hill, you can watch it on C-SPAN, but if you want that transcript, good luck getting it. It isn't free. It's got to go through the Congressional Printing Office. You cannot get, it is a rare hearing that has a transcript readily available. Very few congressional hearings put out transcripts, and there's a reason for that, because Senate hearings, congressional hearings are treasure troves of facts, sworn testimony under oath. God forbid the American people or the media could read through a Senate hearing and spot the lies told by Clapper when he was asked if you're spying on people. You see that in writing, there'd be a revolution in this country. If Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer cared about democracy, all those hearings, all those transcripts would be for free, and you could read them the next day. It takes 7 hours to listen to these hearings. It takes 13 minutes to skim through a 7-hour hearing and get to the juicy part. They don't want that.
No,
Jen,
they don't.
thank you so much, Jen Sanko. Please come back. It's been too long.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed meeting you.
Yeah, this was great. Sorry to keep you. It went
It's
longer.
okay. It's
Jen
okay.
Senko, go read The Brainwashing of My Dad. Right now, it gets the Feldman guarantee. Buy the book, buy The Brainwashing of My Dad. If you don't enjoy it, tell me and I'll reimburse you. It's the Feldman guarantee.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great book and it's a great documentary, The Brainwashing of My Dad. Buy 10 copies of the book, buy 10 copies of the documentary, give it to libraries, give it to friends, leave it in laundry rooms, leave it with people at coffee shops. People need to read this book. Come back, Jen, please.
David, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye, Harry.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.